Shalom and welcome to Ikvot HaMashiach. We're talking about the festival of Hanukkah. And in John chapter 10 verse 22, we see that Yeshua had gone to the temple and he's walking in the porch of Solomon. It says, verse 22, no, it was the festival of Hanukkah in Jerusalem, or the feast of dedication. That's what Hanukkah means. And it was winter, and Yeshua walked in the temple in Solomon's porch. Now, the last few weeks we've been dealing with the Abomination of Desolations, which takes us back to the beginning of Hanukkah. Hanukkah actually started 167 years before the time of Yeshua. It was instituted by Judah the Maccabee, and it was done on the conquest or the defeat of Antiochus Epiphanes, a Syrian general. Actually, he was a Greek. He was one of the descendants of a dynasty established by Alexander the Great in Damascus. So the Greeks had come in and taken control of Damascus, and they had established a Greek empire from there called the Seleucid Empire. And Antiochus the Fourth was the ruler that came against the Jews to take away, strip them of everything that had to do with their religion. Now, he is a picture of the false Messiah of the last days. And so that's why we're studying him. That's why we are looking at this particular festival. We're going to go to the book of Daniel, and chapter 11, where the prophet lays out in detail the actions of Antiochus, and would also tell us the actions of the false Messiah. In this chapter, we see in verse 29, at the appointed time, he shall return and go toward the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter, for ships from Kittim, from Rome, shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return and rage against the holy covenant. Now, what had happened is that Antiochus had really offended the Jews. He had forbidden them to read the Torah. He had forbidden them to circumcise their children, and was killing masses of Jewish babies and killing their mothers also. He had commanded that every priest within Israel sacrifice a pig to God, showing his contempt for God. He took a sow pig, the biggest, ugliest sow pig he could find, took it into the temple, took it to the altar of God, and had it sacrificed. The Abomination of Desolation, which we've talked about the last few weeks, was a statue of Antiochus. I'd like to read to you from the Tyndale's Illustrated Bible Dictionary. And I'm reading on an article called The Desolating Sacrilege, or the Abomination of Desolations. In Hebrew, it's Zakitz Samin, is how you would say the Abomination of Desolation. Where the Zakitz means it's an idol, which is offensive to God. And it says, it probably represents a contemptuous equivalent for Baal Samin, or Lord of Heaven. The Lord is a mere idol, and he is not of heaven. Samin. I'm just reading directly from the article. The name appears to have in view the action of Antiochus Epiphanes, who placed on the altar in the Jerusalem temple a small idolatrous altar. Now, this altar that he used was the Mitzbeach Zahav, the altar of gold, the altar of incense within the HaKodesh, the holy place. A small idolatrous altar described in 1 Maccabees 1:54 and following as the desolating sacrilege. With it, according to Jewish tradition, went an image, almost certainly of Zeus, the Lord of Heaven, bearing the emperor's likeness. And it goes on. Now, that is the Abomination of Desolations. It was set up. The words that are used are specific words referring to an image being set up. Now, continuing on here, in Daniel in chapter 11, it tells us that when he went up north, out of Jerusalem, out of Israel, he went up north along the coast to Lebanon, there to raise an army, and the Jews had appealed to Rome. They had sent some ships and an army. They came, and there was a showdown between Antiochus and the Roman generals. What happened is that Antiochus backed down. Now, word had come back down to Jerusalem, though, that there had been a battle and Antiochus had been slain. So all the people are rejoicing before God that their enemy is slain. First off, Antiochus is really mad at them. I mean, he's mad as can be because they called the Romans. But he is even madder when he rides over the hill and the people are dancing because he's supposed to be dead. And so he begins to do mass slaughtering and all types of things. And he takes and he splits the Jewish people, and any Jews that would become as the Greeks, Hellenists is what we call them, then he rewards them. He gives them high places in his government. He gives them nice homes and so forth. It says, therefore he shall be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. So he shall return and shall regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. And forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary. That's where he killed the pig and placed the idol. The sanctuary fortress. And then they shall take away the daily sacrifices. Now Antiochus Epiphanes took away the daily sacrifices. And of course in the temple you had morning sacrifices and you had evening sacrifices. This is outlined for you in Numbers in chapter 28. So let's write this. Antiochus Epiphanes, which means Antiochus, who is God manifest. Remember that the false Messiah, we looked at this last week in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, we're told that he will go into the temple of God proclaiming that he is God. So Antiochus took away the daily sacrifices, and he placed the abomination of desolation. I'd like for you to look back in Daniel chapter 9 in verse 27. Actually, verses 24 through 27 are a prophecy called the Prophecy of the 70 Weeks. We studied them a few weeks back. But in verse 27 it says about the false Messiah, not Antiochus, but the false Messiah of the future, what people would call the Antichrist. It says, he shall confirm a covenant or a treaty with many for 1 week. That would be with many Jews. The prophecy is to the Jewish people. 1 week equals 7 years. So he's going to make a treaty with Israel for 7 years. Now this is going to be a military treaty. But in the middle of the week, he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. The false Messiah is doing the exact same thing that Antiochus Epiphanes had done, who took away the daily sacrifices. In the next phrase it says, on the wing of abomination shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate. So the false Messiah is going to follow in his footsteps, doing exactly the same thing that Antiochus had done. We remember in Mattatyahu in Matthew chapter 24 that Yeshua said, when you see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, then flee. Leave Judea, leave the country. Now that was future tense. That's looking to the false Messiah. I'd like for you to go, please, to the book of Daniel chapter 12. In chapter 12, verse 11, and from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away, and the abomination of desolation is set up. Again, with it being set up, you see it as an image. It is an idol that is being placed there. There shall be 1,290 days. So going to this board over here, I'm going to put a chart, and I'll use the other board to give you your notes of how to do. But we have the time that is called Yaakov's trouble, Jacob's trouble, or it's known as the Hevle Shel Mashiach, the birth pains of the Messiah, a 7-year period. Now, I'm going to join today's teaching back with many teachings that we've done in the past on the other festivals. So what you will need to do, if you did not see those shows, is go back and catch the reruns, get the tapes or something, so that you can get all the points to fill in. But I'm going to assume that you have seen the shows and you have a pretty good understanding of the various festivals and how they relate to the eschatology of the 7 years. We have 2 eras. Now this is year 6000. Our time period begins when we reach year 6000, and immediately we have the resurrection of the dead and the catching away of the living Zadokim, or righteous ones. They are caught away, and that is the festival, Rosh Hashanah, and the Messianic Kingdom. Now, we wrote a book on this that you might find helpful. It's called Rosh Hashanah and the Messianic Kingdom to Come, which outlines how that that on this day the dead are resurrected, the living are called away, and they are going to be attending in heaven two things. One will be the wedding of the Messiah, and they are attending as the bride, the wedding of the Messiah and his coronation. And in the Jewish wedding customs, you have a period of 7. It's called the 7 days of the chuppah. The 7 days of the chuppah are the wedding canopy, the wedding chamber. And so, while on earth, while we have this going on in heaven, on earth, we have the beginning of the time of the birth pains. And we begin the counting of our days on a Yom Kippur. So notice that Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, is Tishrei 1. Now Tishrei falls in about our September or October. And Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, is Tishrei 10. So we have a 10-day period in here that we have a number of things that will happen. One of the things that will happen will be the rise of the false Messiah. This is when he will take power. Now, it is the 10th day of Tishrei that he signs that treaty with Israel, the one that we just read about in Daniel chapter 9. From that point, we're going to have 7 360-day years. Now, 360-day years are what we call biblical or prophetic years. And so from that point, from here to here, which is the second coming of Yeshua, where his foot will touch the Mount of Olives, this will also be on a Yom Kippur, is 7 360-day years, or a total of 2,520 days total, all put together. We have a halfway point, and the 7-year period is divided into 2 halfway points, or two sides with 1 halfway point. Each side will equal 1,260 days. Now this could also be written in several ways. It's called time times and 1/2 time, or 42 months. All of this will equal 1,260 days. Now note that we are told that in the middle of the month, or the middle of the 7-year period, he takes away the sacrifices. Do you remember that? That was in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. It says, in the middle of the week, he shall take away the sacrifices. So let's make a note of this. Sacrifices taken away. In addition, now I can give you the date here. If I know this date, I can go forward 1,260 days on a 360-day year, and I can give you the date that this happens. It will be Nisan 10. That's about in our March or April. Now Nisan 10 is the exact same day that the false Messiah will enter Jerusalem, and he will battle against the 2 witnesses that have been prophesying in this first 3.5-year period, the 1,260 days. He will battle against them, and then he will slay them. They will lay in the street of Jerusalem for 3.5 days to the 14th of Nisan, which is Passover, and then they will be resurrected. Now, he is following in the footsteps of the real Messiah because he's a counterfeit. And so Yeshua, if you go back and you look at Yeshua's first coming, he entered the city of Jerusalem riding on the donkey on the 10th day of Nisan. So there's a parallel. Everything that happened before is happening again, but here it's with the counterfeit. He is following in his path to deceive. So we have 1,260 days. Now we're told something here in Daniel chapter 12. It says, and from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away, now then we see where it's taken away, and the abomination of desolation is set up. Now we have a very powerful word there, the conjunction and. And so don't miss that. That's one of the key words in that verse. It says, and the abomination of desolation is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Now that means, on this chart, That means that from the time that the Abomination of Desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days till the Messiah would literally return. So, using this verse, we are able to calculate the day in the Jewish year. I can't tell you the day in the Julian calendar, the calendar that goes January to December. I can't give you that. But I can give you the day on the Jewish calendar, the biblical calendar, that the Abomination of Desolation is set up. It will be set up 30 days before the false Messiah enters Jerusalem. It will be set up in the month called Adar. Within the next few weeks, we're going to be talking quite a bit about Adar, because we'll be studying the festival of Purim, or Purim as it is called here in the United States, from the book of Esther. So the month before Nisan, the month of Passover, is called Adar, and the Abomination of Desolations will be set up on Adar 10. Now that gives us a total, from the time the Abomination of Desolation is set up, it will give us a total of 1,290 days. Now, there's a couple points that I'd like to bring out on this. First off, the false Messiah does not enter until 30 days later. This statue that is placed here as a result of the false prophet that's with him from Revelation in chapter 13. He commands the statue to be made. He commands the people to worship at this statue. Also, we have the two real witnesses from Revelation chapter 11 and Zechariah chapter 4 that are the spirit and the power of Elijah and Moses. And they're going to be prophesying to the people, telling them to not go to this image, to stay away from it, to recognize it for what it is, but to reject the image and to reject this false Messiah. And so, from this point, we're going to have a tremendous passage that's coming up. It tells us, verse 12, "Blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1,335 days." The only way that you can understand that particular passage is to know the festivals of the Lord, to understand the calendar that God has given to the Jewish people. Outside of that, it is impossible. But once you understand that calendar, and once you see that, then this thing can be pieced together, and you can sit back and just go, oh my goodness, look how plain it is. Look at what he's saying. Look at what is being communicated. So what we're going to see, back on our chart here, is 1,290 days. Where we're going to calculate from is the midway point when the false Messiah comes into the city. That's when he enters in, and from that point, he is going to desecrate the temple. So what we're going to do is go forward from the 10th day of Nisan, 1,000, let me get the exact quote here, 1,335 days. 1,335 days. Now, remember that Yeshua returns in the 7th year on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. That is the 7th month and the 10th day. During the 5 days following Yom Kippur, the angels are sent out to gather the elect from the 4 corners of the earth, and that they are going to bring all the people up for the festival of Sukkot. We'll have a week-long celebration and rejoicing that the kingdom is here on earth. Messiah has come, and everybody will be dancing, rejoicing, singing, feasting. It'll be the time of the wedding supper. But we have a problem, because as much as we've come up to rejoice and to praise God, our false Messiah, our future Antiochus Epiphanes, has desecrated the temple. He has done exactly what the previous Antiochus Epiphanes did. He placed an abomination of desolations within. He showed contempt for God, and he did all types of things that were against the God of heaven. And so if we take it forward on the Jewish calendar, 1,335 days, we find that it brings us to, and I'm going to write this on the other board so that you can put it in your notes, it brings us to Kislev 25. Kislev 25, which is the first day of Hanukkah. In other words, that which happened before will happen again. The Antiochus Epiphanes episode and everything happening on the 25th day of Kislev, and that was the day that they rededicated the temple back to God after Antiochus had desecrated it. It is going to repeat itself exactly, and Yeshua the Messiah, the prince that we read about in Ezekiel chapter 40 through 48, is going to rededicate the temple back to God on the festival of Hanukkah following his return. It will be exactly 1,335 days since the false Messiah had entered into the temple and desecrated the temple. And to me, that astounds me. That causes me, as I see these type of things, I know that only a God in heaven, a God that is master of the universe, could have put together this scripture. There is no way that it could be put together. He structured the days. He chose all these things to happen just as they were so that we could see and we could understand. Now we're going to go back into Daniel in chapter 11 once again, and we're going to look at some more concerning the false Messiah who's coming. We're told in verse 33, let's pick up in verse 32 where we left off. It says, "Those who do wickedly against the covenant, he shall corrupt with flattery." Now that was true of Antiochus. That will be true of the false Messiah who's coming. "But the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. And those of the people who understand shall instruct many. Yet for many days they shall fall by sword and flame." We read in Daniel chapter 7, we read in Revelation in chapter 13, Revelation chapter 17, that the false Messiah will make war against the Zadokim, against the saints, by captivity and plundering. Now when they fall, they shall be aided with a little help, but many shall join them by intrigue. It'll be a time that many thousands of people, in fact a number that no one can number, will become believers in Yeshua. You see, the time of the birth pains, the time of the trouble, is not a time of the destruction of God. It is a time of the grace of God, because in their affliction they will seek Him early. "And some of those of understanding," verse 35, "shall fall to refine them, purge them, make them white until the time of the end, because it is still for the appointed time." In other words, it would happen in the days of Antiochus, but yet it would happen again in the last days. "Then the king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god." This is what we looked at last week, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, where the false Messiah goes into the temple, declares that he is God. "He shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods." The very fact that he's declaring he's God is blasphemy. "And shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished. For what has been determined shall be done. He shall regard neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above them all." Now we mentioned before from Daniel chapter 9, verse 26, that he would be of the same people, the false Messiah would be of the same people that destroyed the temple. That was the Romans, if you'll remember. So the Romans, but here we're told something else. Not only is he from Europe, but he regards not the God of his fathers. Now that is a phrase that identifies him as a Jewish man. He is a Jewish man along the same lines as Judas Iscariot, the betrayer. By the way, Judas Iscariot, you might be interested in this. First off, the word Judah, which was his name, it meant to praise God. But Iscariot means the cutthroat. So he is, Judas Iscariot was a picture of the false Messiah that was coming. He was the betrayer that was in there. In his throat, he was a murderer from the beginning. So there are a number of other passages I'd like for you to see that show us that the false Messiah will be a Jew from Europe. Please go to the book of Ezekiel in chapter 21. We're going to go to verse 25, which tells us, "Now to you, O profane, wicked prince of Israel, whose day has come, whose iniquity shall end, thus says the Lord God, remove the turban, take off the crown, Nothing shall remain the same. Exalt the lowly and abase the exalted. Overthrown, overthrown. I will make it overthrown. It shall be no longer until he comes whose right it is, and I will give it to him. The profane wicked prince of Israel is the false Messiah, but the one that is coming whose right it is Yeshua, is the real, the bona fide Messiah. Another reason that we see that the false Messiah is Jewish is because he's a counterfeit. Satan's no fool. If you're going to have a Messiah, the Messiah is a Jew. It was prophesied. It was given for from the beginning of time that he would be from the tribe of Judah. But what God calls us to is to wait for the salvation of the Lord. You and I are called to walk in Yeshua's footsteps, to walk in the Ikvot HaMashiach.